Welcome back to Stop the Takes, football podcast focused on getting back to just talking ball. I'm Dakota, that is Austin, and today we are continuing our division draft reviews with the NFC North. We kicked things off with the AFC North. If you haven't watched that video, we recommend checking it out. But today we'll be focused on the NFC North. So we'll go ahead and dive into things with the Chicago Bears. I think besides Ted McMillan at 8, which we had seen mocked a good bit, I think we got sucked into believing the Panthers were going to take an edge. But a lot of people still mocked McMillan there. I think the 10th pick was really where things started to kind of go in a different direction with the draft, with the Bears taking Colston Loveland. So what were your thoughts with that pick specifically, and then kind of where the Bears went from there?
I'll start by saying I think Colston Loveland's a good player. However, we were watching the draft together, Dakota, and you know my reaction to that pick. I was absolutely shocked. I was floored. For one, I didn't expect them to take a tight end. I didn't really feel like that was a strong enough need where they would take it with the 10th pick. Maybe they just thought he was the best player available, but even that's surprising because the majority of draft analysts felt like Tyler Warren was the best tight end in this class, and they went with Colston Loveland. Interesting pick. Top 10 tight ends have not had a good track record as of recent. Like last season, Brock Bowers went 13. Again, you can't compare draft classes, but just on the surface, that kind of feels rough. But listen, if Loveland becomes an elite tight end, then that's worth the 10th overall pick. No question about it. I just mostly think about what they could have had instead of Colston Loveland. So that wasn't my favorite pick of theirs, but it did get better for the Bears throughout the rest of their draft, I think.
Yeah, I completely agree. And again, nothing to say that Loveland's not a good player. Just they started to get a lot of steam, I think, a few weeks before the draft that they may go tight end there, and it's probably due to the noise that some of the media who's more in tune with these franchises kind of knew. But I do agree. It was, it's obvious based on this draft that they had, a bit of a plan with their first few picks to just build around Caleb Williams. So they're adding a dynamic playmaker to tight end. He has a different skill set than Cole Kmet. He was at 96th percentile in yards per route run, which is pretty good for a tight end. So maybe we also let the noise get to us a little bit in terms of the rankings of the tight ends. We never know, but it did seem like Tyler Warren was the consensus, at least on the consensus board, was the better prospect. So, but they had a plan. I mean, apparently they loved him. So, I mean, it gives Caleb Williams a dynamic playmaker over the middle of the field specifically, which can pair with their second round pick, which was one of our favorite picks from the entire draft, which was Luther Burden. He falls to the second round, and the Bears grabbed him at pick 39, adding another playmaker to that offense. So I think when you pair that pick with Loveland, you start to see the vision a bit, and you're like, okay, this offense is about to be pretty dynamic.
I totally agree with that, man. I mean, listen, Luther Burden in the second round, that automatically made me love their draft because I definitely thought he was worth a first-round pick. I mean, you could argue coming off his 2023 season that he's worth a top 10 pick. So it's kind of, again, one of those drafts where it's like, well, if you flip the two players, maybe I don't hate it as much, even though I don't think I would have taken Luther Burden this draft with a top 10 pick either. But listen, Luther Burden has a ton of potential, and plugging him in that offense, it was a pretty clear theme that the Bears said, hey, it's Caleb Williams time. Like, we're going to load him up with weapons. We're going to provide what we need to provide. Because if you pair that, their first two picks, with what they did with the offensive line in the offseason, it's like they are focused on their franchise quarterback, which I love as a strategy. I may not have loved the Colston Loveland pick, but I love the overall strategy of saying, hey, you know what? We are going to put Caleb in the best position as possible. And that's what they did with their first two picks, man. And I love the Burden pick because it's like you got a second first rounder with one of your second rounders. So, yeah, I absolutely love that pick.
Yeah, completely agree. And he adds something to the offense that, I know some fans, Bears or not, may be like, well, you just drafted Rome Odunze last year. Why do you need him? But he's a very different player than Rome. He fits pretty well. He may be slightly more like DJ Moore, but DJ and Rome are better outside guys. And Luther's a guy you kind of want to put in the slot and or just kind of have him move around constantly, Somebody you can throw screens to. You want him running shallow routes. You just want to get the ball in his hands early and then let him go make plays because he's pretty elite when it comes to being able to break tackles as a receiver. So again, adding something that also can be, both these picks are almost like security blanket esque, right? For Caleb, where you've got the tight end that can be over the middle of the field, and then you've got Luther who can, take short routes and take them the whole way. So love both those picks from at least building around Caleb. And after revamping the offensive line like they did, their offense is starting to look pretty damn good. So, and then continuing to add depth with their second, they traded back, so they had those 2 second round picks at the top, from the Bryce Young trade, and they ended up trading back where the Bills came up for DJ or TJ Sanders. So they trade back, pick up some extra draft capital, and then take Ozzie Trapillo, the tackle from Boston College. I think he played right tackle the past couple seasons. So I'm guessing the plan will probably be to move him back to the left, which he started at Boston College, to probably compete for that left tackle job with Braxton Jones, because I think they're pretty solid with Darnell right now at right tackle. Either way, it adds depth, but I would assume he'd probably come in and start competing at that left tackle spot.
Yeah, and even if he doesn't, if the plan for him isn't to start right away, you need a
Yeah.
swing tackle, and he's a good option for a swing tackle or a developmental tackle. I mean, listen, tackles outside the first round are, usually developmental guys. They're not usually slated to start. But I mean, I'm never gonna fault a team for taking a chance on a tackle because
No.
it's such a valuable position. Now, their next pick, Shamar Turner, I didn't love that pick as much. Shamar Turner is not a very productive player, and I felt like they could have had better in that position. But listen, they do need defensive line depth. There's no question about that. I just felt like there's probably better players on the board than Shamar Turner at that position if they were trying to attack a specific position. But honestly, I don't even know. Looking at the Bears draft, I don't know if that is their strategy. I think they probably had guys they just really liked, and they were like,
Yeah.
it doesn't really matter what position they're at. We're just going to take this guy. And that's kind of what this pick felt like. But again, I mean, I don't love Shamar Turner as a player, but I get it. I understand that kind of pick. So,
Yeah, I completely agree. And everybody wanted to, kind of give them edge early on in the mocks at 10. If it wasn't Genty. So it's kind of interesting to see them not go that route at all in the draft. But they did at least add, one piece to add some depth to that defensive line. But they used that with that other second round pick. So that trade back gave them another second. So they ended up with 3 second round picks, which is love seeing that drafting in volume in the early rounds like that. And then, they take probably one of the bigger reaches in the draft with the Ruben Hippolyte, the second pick out of Maryland. But he's an interesting prospect because it's obviously loved him, but the dude is quick. Sideline to sideline type guy, not incredibly productive. At Maryland, a bit undersized, but the guy's fast. He can kind of go from sideline to sideline for them. So adding you know, some depth at linebacker, and they picked up Zal Frazier from UTSA, the corner, to add some depth there as well, and then round it out with the Luke Newman pick, which I think a few people were pretty high on him. The transfer from Holy Cross to Michigan State. So adding some guard depth, at a guy that they need depth on that offensive line. They revamped it, and now they've added depth pieces to it. So I mean, it's obvious that with Ben Johnson, they want to future proof that.
it is interesting. I mean, Luke Newman is slated to be their backup left guard right now. So, I mean, in the sixth round to get a depth piece like that, I like that pick a lot. I thought they probably could have tacked running back a little sooner. There was a lot of good running backs left on the board at their fourth pick when they kind of reached on Ruben, but maybe they didn't. Maybe they felt like, I mean, that was kind of the chatter. I mean, people kind of thought like they were the Genty landing spot. I think if Genty fell to them, they probably would have went Genty, to be completely honest with you. But all their second round picks, I thought they might take a running back with all their seconds. They just didn't. They felt like they didn't need to do that. So, which is fine. I get it. I mean, take the more valuable positions, which is kind of what they did. I mean, they did take the more valuable positions until the fourth round, but yeah, also to touch on your point earlier, dude, they did a great job of working the board, man. I mean, they loaded up on next year draft capital, and that's what good teams do, man. They draft in volume, they just get more shots, and it usually works out. So yeah, overall, I do like this Bears class, especially that Luther Burden pick.
Yeah, completely agree. And Kyle Monungai is an interesting guy. Not he's a short, stocky power guy who has a little bit of a burst. He had a solid 10-yard split on his 40. Ran a pretty slow 40, but he's got a little bit of twitch to him at his size. So I think to be honest, there's a solid chance he's already getting some of those tougher carries alongside Roshan Johnson when Swift's not out there. So completely agree though. Surprised they didn't go running back a bit earlier, and maybe they had, depending on how the board went, and they just didn't want to force it. So, and I think somebody pointed out that one of the first things that happened when Ben Johnson showed up to Detroit was stop using DeAndre Swift, and then they shipped him out. So we'll be curious to see what he does. It doesn't seem like he's a big fan of him. So we'll see what he does with him. But Monungai could get some touches early. And to your point, they made all those moves in this draft class, and then they leave with 8 picks in next year's draft. So make 3 second-round picks and still have extra draft capital next year. Can't really beat that.
Yeah, I agree, dude. Again, that's what the better teams do. They draft in volume. So we saw that with the Ravens draft that we've already reviewed, and they've already set up next year to draft in volume once again. So, yeah.
Okay, last thing then. Who was your favorite pick from the Bears?
I have to say Luther Burden, man. I just felt like Luther Burden was such good value there. I think he's going to make an impact on this offense right away. Like you said, his skill set fits into that offense immediately. You play Moore and Adunze on the outside, and you throw Luther Burden in the slot and let him do what he does. And yeah, I mean that Bears. If Caleb Williams is good, the Bears are gonna be fantastic, man. It really just comes down to Caleb's development and if he can take a jump in year 2.
Yeah, I completely agree. We were both big, really high on Luther Burden. I mean, wide receiver 2 for both of us. Would have gladly had a team take him, from pick probably 18 on in the first, and would have felt pretty good about it. So no, to pick a different one, I do like the Luke Newman pick. I think taking a shot on a guy like that from Holy Cross that goes to the Big Ten and Michigan State, plays really well, adds depth. And could potentially be, a guy that you can plug in if anything happens to one of your 2 guards. So I'll shout out the Holy Cross transfer alum with that one. Cool. So that wraps up the Bears 2025 class. So let's move on to the Detroit Lions. They had they were another team that everybody wanted to mock an edge to at the end of the first round. Like it was one of those teams where you get there and you're just like, what edge is on the board? And they go Tyleek Williams instead, which I know people are kind of torn on, the value of him there and whatnot. So you're starting with him. What were your main thoughts with the Tyleek pick?
Listen, some people were high on him. Mike Renner was really high on Tyleek Williams, and Renner is a good draft analyst, so I get it. I get why they take Tyleek Williams there. They need defensive line, dude. We saw last year what happened to the Lions was they were just depleted on defense, specifically on the defensive line. So I totally get why they attack that, and he probably will plug in immediately and play.
Yeah.
So I probably would have taken him in the second round, but dude, I mean, he got picked with the 28th pick. They're drafting at the back end of the first, so I get it. I mean, if I'm nitpicking, I say, well, why couldn't you trade down and take him later? But some people were higher on him, so I overall think that's a solid first round pick.
Yeah, I think in hindsight, we were both. I was kind of like felt like a little bit of a reach at the time, but and I think it's more so just to the fact that one of the biggest complaints at the end of last season for the Lions was the lack of pass rush without Aiden out there. And he's not a great pass rusher right now. He could develop into one. He is an absolute game wrecker, though, in the run game. He is powerful. And at his size, he almost plays more like a 3-tech when he's more like a nose, where he can just shoot the gap, which I think surprises a lot of those interior offensive linemen when he just fires into the gap like a 3-tech. So definitely have a guy that they're going to be able to plug and start immediately. Should help their run defense out pretty well, and then we'll see if he kind of develops a pass rush set. But will be an immediate plug and play starter for them. And then I think we're both a big fan of the second round pick, Tate Ratledge. I think they moved up a couple spots to make this pick. But like everybody was saying, that dude just looks like a guy Dan Campbell would want on his team. The mullet out there flapping in the wind while he's doing his workout. guard
So
from
true.
Georgia. Yeah.
I totally agree with that, dude. I absolutely love the Tate Ratledge pick. They filled their starting guard need in the second round. I mean, Tate Ratledge right now is the only rookie slated to start according to our lands. Although I think Tyleik Williams will play a lot of snaps, but yeah, dude. I mean, Tate Ratledge in the second round. Listen, a lot of people like on the mock draft sims, you were able to get Ratledge in the third round a lot. But just look at how the
You were.
draft was going. I mean, Tyler Booker went 12 overall. Gray Zabel went 18. Like those interior offensive linemen are becoming more and more valuable in the NFL's eyes, dude. Like, and you see it because I mean, the bad offensive lines that have bad interiors, dude, they just get wrecked, and the offense cannot function. So totally loved the Ratledge pick in the second round, even though, he might have been a little lower on the consensus, but I actually don't even know where he was on the consensus. But he's a good player, and they filled a starting guard position. And now the offensive line, dude, I mean, their offensive line has absolutely no holes. I mean, we're talking about probably the best offensive line in football.
Yeah, I completely agree. I mean, he was one of those guys, to your point too, like when I was doing mocks, if he was there in the third round, it didn't matter which team I was picking for. I just here's Tate Ratledge for you. Like he could
Yeah.
literally either start at guard or compete immediately. So yeah, continuing to make sure that that offensive line stays sound in Detroit, even in the post Ben Johnson era, which will be interesting to see. And they also take Miles Frazier in the fifth round out of LSU to add even more depth to that offensive line. A guy that may be able to compete with Christian Mahogany at the left guard spot, or at the very least, immediately play a backup role for you. So adding that offensive, building through the trenches was a theme across a lot of teams this year. And the Lions, they've had one of the best offensive lines, making sure that doesn't go away, and then adding to that defensive line. And then one of the more interesting picks they made that, cost some capital was the Isaac Tesla pick, wide receiver out of Arkansas. I think they traded 2 third-round picks to move up for him. And I think it's kind of considered a reach based on the consensus a little bit. But he is a very interesting prospect because he, like, basically no production, none, but is an absolute athletic freak.
He
Was
is,
one of the
man.
higher. He ranked first in terms of athleticism scores based on Next Gen Stats. So they clearly watched the tape, saw what a freak athlete this guy was, combined with all of his testing at the combine, and said, "We want that dude on our team."
He is ranked 29th out of 3,800 receivers from 1987 to 2025 in RAS score. 99th percentile athlete. I mean, the dude is absolutely a freak. Ran a 4.43 at 2.7 or 2.14 was his weight. 6'3". I mean, yeah, the dude is an absolute freak. And listen, taking a guy like that in the third round, I like that pick, man. I mean, that's when you take those athletic freaks to see if they can hit the upside of their potential. So I absolutely actually really like. PFF has him at 6'4". Dude, if he's 6'4" and he ran a
Yeah.
4.4, I mean, dude, he's just an absolute freak, man. And he's not going to have a path to play immediately, but that's the ideal position for a guy like that who needs to develop, who doesn't necessarily know how to play the game yet, but he doesn't need to. That's not going to be his role here. And yeah, whenever a team trades up for a player, it is always interesting because it's like, okay, this team clearly
Mm-hmm.
expected this guy to be gone at this point and really fell in love with this guy, and they want to go get him. And when I see a smart GM like Brad Holmes do that, I'm like, okay, that is interesting to me. Like they clearly see something in this guy. So I am intrigued by that pick.
And the thing is, too, we'll kind of never know because people don't talk about what their boards were like too much after the draft. So we'll never know if teams were at least in agreement that they were higher on him than the consensus. Like with a lot of these players, right, that go higher, that feel like reaches. Like we never really know if the rest of the league was at least somewhat higher on it than the consensus. But it's one thing is very clear, and that is that Brad Holmes and Dan Campbell have changed the culture in Detroit. I mean, over the last couple seasons, it's crazy to say, but the Lions are one of the winningest teams, and they have a type of guy they want on their team. and it has worked in terms of what they've built so far and people buying into that, and then going and getting guys in the draft like Tyleek, who's a dog, like Tate Ratledge, who's a dog, like Tesla, who's an athletic freak, and then one of my other favorite picks was Ahmad Hassanin, the D lineman from Boise State, with a really cool story. I think he is technically the first player ever from Egypt to get drafted. And he has a cool story where I think it was, I don't know if it was at the if it was at the Senior Bowl or if it was at like the Shrine Bowl. But the story of him like chirping with the coaches there for the drills, which that right there is the type of thing where they put Dan didn't even watch his tape. He just saw that. Was like, all right, get him in here. Exactly, we want that guy in our locker room.
He was also a pretty productive player at Boise, man. Yeah. And getting him in the 6th round, listen, he didn't test well. That's why he went in the 6th round. But I mean, again, in the 6th round, love taking a chance on a guy like that. And he does feel like a Dan Campbell kind of guy. I actually kind of like hope they get Hard Knocks this year, because I think they'd be kind of a fascinating team to watch in the offseason. And plus you have the Dan Campbell factor. But yeah, dude, I'm not surprised at all that they went interior defensive lineman and interior offensive lineman with their first 2 picks. This is just a very Detroit Lions draft, man. It's not flashy, but that's how they wanted to build their team, man. And that's what they've done. And like you said, it's completely changed the culture. They also get Dominic Lovett in the 7th round. He was solid, I would say. So that's a decent 7th round pick. Just an overall, I would say, solid draft. Like again, another team that didn't overthink it. They had a theme going in, and they're like, we're attacking the trenches because that's how we built this team. And it was clear that they were lacking some depth there, especially from the defensive line perspective last year. And they needed the starting guard. So, yeah, man, I love this draft for the Lions.
And Lovett's a really interesting one because, I think more and more we're starting to see some of these guys, and part of it's due to the amount of transferring and whatnot, where you have like higher star recruits that kind of fall really far in the draft. I mean, we had I think there was a list somebody had of like maybe 8 to 10 5-star recruits that went undrafted in the draft, which was wild. And Dominic Lovett, I think, was a 4-star. He may have been a 5 on some recruiting sites. And he started his career at Missouri and never really took off like we thought. Like, I remember when he transferred to Georgia as Tennessee fans, and we were kind of
concerned.
I don't have to play this dude the next couple of years, but he never really took off like people expected. So I love that for the value in the 7th, to get a guy like that who clearly has had the talent and the skill set to get it. And to your point earlier with Tisla, doesn't have to play right now. Set him behind, let these guys develop and see if they can become a playmaker for you. And then they also took Dan Jackson, safety out of Georgia. So of their class, they take 3 guys from Georgia, which is probably not a bad strategy. I mean, it's been working for the Eagles. So
exactly.
That feeder program there. The only last thing I'll say is I'm surprised they didn't attack edge a bit more, because the second Hutch got hurt last year, man, their pass rush was gone. So I'm a little surprised they didn't attack edge a bit more to have a top end pass rusher alongside Aiden Hutchinson, but also for depth wise. So only thing that kind of surprised me, but overall, yeah, I think it's a solid class. So what would you say is your favorite? I think I know it. What is your favorite pick for the Lions?
It's got to be Taylor Ratledge in the 2nd round, dude. Listen, teams were I wouldn't say even overvaluing. They were just valuing those interior offensive linemen quite a bit, and to come away with one of the better guards in the draft to kind of solidify this offensive line, right? They had one hole, now they're going to fill it, and it's going to continue to be the best line in the NFL. So, yeah, I'm going to go Ratledge in the 2nd round.
I would agree. To be different, I'll say Ahmed Hassanin. I think just the story alone is so cool, and then just the fact that it's a prime example of Dan Campbell and Brad Holmes just getting a guy that fits their culture, and they're so good at doing that. So hopefully we'll see him develop, maybe get some playing time. But I like that pick for them. Cool. And then we did touch on UDFAs for the Bears. For the Lions, I don't think there's any names that stand out here either. One of the only ones that does to me is Jackson Meeks, wide receiver from Syracuse. I know he was a little bit hyped at different points throughout his career. So they get him as a UDFA, another receiver to kind of add some depth there. But that wraps up the Detroit Lions 2025 class. So let's go to the Green Bay Packers. So they make a splash. They make a splash and do something they hadn't done in a couple decades. And that was take a wide receiver in front of their hometown crowd at the draft, take Matthew Golden with the 23rd pick, and then they take a receiver later on as well. What were your immediate thoughts on that Matthew
I,
Golden pick?
I just based on the crowd's reaction, the crowd loved it, man. So listen, Matthew Golden has a ton of potential, and I think he was one of the few receivers in this draft that had X wide receiver potential. Yeah, a lot of fans will see the 4.29 and think that's how he plays. That's not really how he plays. He's more of a possession like route runner type receiver. And the Packers have just lacked that, man. They don't have a true number one wide receiver on this team. I mean, Matthew Golden's already in our lands right now the starter at X receiver in this depth chart. So that just kind of tells you what they've potentially added. It doesn't mean it's going to work out. It doesn't mean that he'll become one of the best receivers in the league. But I think I totally agree. He was one of the best players on the board at the time, and it fills one of the most important positions of need. And this receiving group is just, I think, probably a bunch of average players, and they needed to kind of get somebody that's a difference maker, and Golden has the chance to be that.
Yeah, I completely agree, and I think Packers fans are somewhat split. I feel like I see more who are like our receivers aren't quite there. I think more lean that way, and I think they've been wanting them to take a receiver in the first round because again, like nobody, the Christian Watson, Romeo Doubs, Dontavian Wicks, Jane Reed, nobody's really like elite at anything. And I think if you really want to maximize what you've got with Jordan Love, I think getting a guy in there that can become something more is impactful. And I do like Golden, and yeah, to your point, like he ran. I think it shocked literally everybody when he ran that 4.29, because he doesn't play like it. He plays more like 4.4, and that's not a bad thing because he's good at beating press man. And even at his size, like he had a pretty solid contested catch rate last year, which is interesting for a dude that's 5'11". So he's a really interesting prospect, and I think he's probably one of the prime examples. Was talking to one of our buddies about like when teams draft guys, we don't necessarily know what the end goal is, and like if you simulate that guy's career 1,000 times, there's probably a bell curve, right, of what they become, and what you target on that is also important. Like if you were targeting him to just max and be the best of those 1,000 simulations every time, that's a lot. But if you identify a segment of that you think he could be, impactful at, then I think there's a lot of value in that. So I think Golden has the ability to immediately make a difference for their wide receiver group and for Jordan Love. And then pairing him with Savion Williams, I think we were both pretty big fans of too in the third round at TCU. Completely different size, completely different skill set. Pretty athletic though for it. 6'4", 220 and ran a 4.48. But he is a really interesting prospect, and I love pairing him with Matthew Golden.
Yeah, dude. Best contested catch rate in the class, apparently, at 88.9%. That is an absurd contested catch percentage, dude. Listen, just based on how the Packers, I like to try to pull themes from these drafts. They clearly don't think this receiving core is where it needs to be. Like that's pretty obvious. 2 out of their first 3 picks, they take wide receiver, and I actually really love the receivers they came away with, man. I think they targeted 2 guys that can make this offense better immediately. And I think they've identified that, hey, the defense might not be where it's at. You can make that argument, especially they could have targeted the edge, right? That was what a lot of people had them targeting. But I think offensively, their clear weakness was receiver, and they came away with 2 that I think will help Jordan Love. And listen, that's kind of like the Bears. You have to help your franchise quarterback, and they've already invested in Jordan Love. So you especially have to invest in him when you've already made that investment with a contract. So yeah, man, I like the picks. I like the strategy because I think they're right. I think the receiving core is not where it needs to be, and these 2 guys can change that.
Completely agree, and also Savion adds a lot of unique skill set. He had some time as a kick returner. At his size, which is kind of crazy to see a dude 6'4". You usually see smaller receivers back there. And they also used him as like a running back. It's interesting because like they may use him in almost like a Randall-ish Cobb way from the past Packers teams, but also he's a different size, but I think you could almost equate it a little bit to Debo in the way that the 49ers have used him some. Getting him in motion, handing the ball directly to him, doing a lot of stuff with him. So he opens up, creativity for the offense for Matt LaFleur, who's one of the better kind of offensive minds in the NFL as well. So love that. And then continuing again to the point of building around Jordan Love, they take Belton, grab another tackle. They drafted Jordan Morgan last year in the first, take Anthony Belton in the second to continue to add depth and competition at the tackle positions to reinforce that offensive line. And then they take another one later on, the composer, who wrote Star Wars music, John Williams, out of Cincinnati in the seventh. So, a couple tackles there to add depth. And then, the position that people expected them to go at a lot, which was edge, they double up at edge in the fourth round with Baron Sorrell, who has a cool story. I'll let you touch on that. And then Colin Oliver, both of them in the fourth round.
Yeah, man. Baron Sorrell was interesting. He was like the last dude left in the green room when the Packers took him. So then he came out. He stayed the whole time, right? He's day 3. He's like, I was invited to the draft. I'm staying through this process. He was drafted day 3 to the team that was hosting the draft, which was really cool. So he came out. He started meeting fans afterwards. He was real emotional. Pretty cool to see that man having his moment with his new fan base. And yeah, listen, this doubling up strategy for the Packers has worked in the past. This is part of their draft strategy, man. They've done this several drafts where they say, okay, this is a position of need, so we're going to go ahead and double up on it, and one of these guys will hit. And that has worked out really well for them. And they did it again. I mean, they really did it all throughout the draft. They took 2 tackles, they took 2 edge, they took 2 receivers. Like, that's just what they do, which I find kind of interesting. But going back to the Anthony Belton pick, listen, a lot of these linemen, you'll see, oh, well, this is a consensus reach. Well, dude, because that's how much GMs and NFL teams value offensive linemen. I mean, that's just the reality. I will never fault a team for taking a tackle in the second round to develop, because it's such an important position. You have to take shots on it, kind of like quarterback, and see if they can become good in the NFL. And it's not like he was bad in college. I mean, he was a productive and good pass blocker in college. So I like the Anthony Belton pick as well. And then again, the edges. I love doubling up on edge. Like, one of these guys will likely become a contributor. Now, are they going to become an elite edge rusher like they could have potentially got in the first round? Probably not. But if they even contribute, if they're in the rotation, getting that in the fourth round is valuable.
Yeah, completely agree. And, the Sorrell thing is really cool, him being there for the Packers fans. Not sure why he was necessarily in the green room. I don't know how that works. It's like you're just allowed to show up.
Yeah.
There was some hype he may have been able to go on day 2, but he goes to the fourth. And then Colin Oliver is a really interesting pick too, because he moved around a good bit at Oklahoma State. So he originally started as an inside linebacker, and then they started to play him on the edge a bit in 2023, and then in 2024 he was playing at edge but got hurt. So haven't really been able to see his full potential at edge, and I like taking a shot on him in the fourth because the guy was productive as an inside backer too. I mean, the guy he's got skills, so I like that pick. And then rounding out their class with D tackle out of Georgia, who I think had a better 2023 than 2024, posted some pretty solid PFF grades. And then the corner out of Tulane, Michael Robinson,
But it's kind of
rounded out their class.
Kind of like the Lions strategy, right? Just take shots on those Georgia players. Like,
Yeah.
their rosters are so loaded. I think a lot of GMs are just expecting, well, they might not have played as much at Georgia just because they're so loaded. This guy might just be buried on the depth chart and have some potential. And listen, it's a 6th round pick. Like, a lot of these players just will never really learn their name in the NFL because they don't pan out. But I mean, it's also, again, another strategy the Packers like to take is draft and volume, and they did that not to a large extent in this class, but they had more than the allotted 7 picks. So again, man, I overall like the Packers strategy. And just, I mean, again, going back to the golden pick, man, this could change their offense, man. This could put them over the hump if they hit big, they hit the high range, and again, high range but low percentage of Golden's outcome. This could completely change their offense in 2025.
Yeah, Yeah, and yeah, to your point with the Georgia thing, it's like I guarantee a lot of scouts when they're scouting some of these guys are like, would this guy start and get more playing time elsewhere?
Yeah,
That's got
exactly.
to be part of it. Like, and to be honest, it may help you out a little bit where you may have a bit more fresher legs, and more opportunity to develop them. But Brinson was a bit athletic too, so especially in the later rounds, it always makes sense to take chances on dudes that have athletic profiles. And I think Micah has the opportunity to be a good run defender. He's got decent top end speed, but not necessarily like the quickness and burst. So, may have a chance to get a little bit of playing time. But again, you just need depth. And then, Packers don't make a ton of moves sometimes. So going into next season, they just have their allotted 7 picks for 2026. So not much shifting going on next year for them. But yeah, and then let's see before we make a best pick, any UDFAs that stand out for them. Julian Fleming is an
Yeah,
interesting one.
I
He's
did
a
see Fleming.
5-star. Yeah, 5-star. There's one of those former 5-stars I mentioned that went undrafted. So former 5-star they get to bring in to compete at receiver, see what he can do. I think it's the main one that stands out there. So that mine, what was your favorite pick for the Packers?
Man, it's really between the Savion Williams and Matthew Golden pick, but I'll say Matthew Golden because like I like taking a chance on the guy. It was a weak wide receiver class. There wasn't a lot of elite prospects, and Golden was one of the few players that has that elite potential. And I think that was the biggest position of need for them, man. And I like taking that in the first round.
I'll go Savion then. I just love his unique skill set, his size, his speed, his athleticism, the way you can move him around. I think Matt LaFleur could find some uses for him. He's the type of guy that would have been fascinating in like a Shanahan offense, which LaFleur comes from the tree. So
Sure.
see what he can cook up for him. And then I would shout out Colin Aldridge because I'm a fan of his. I think that value in the 5th round is solid for him, but I would go Savion as my favorite pick. All
I
right,
like
that
it.
wraps up the Packers 2025 class, which leaves us with the Minnesota Vikings, um, who had made just 5 picks. I think they went into the draft with only 4, so they pick up an extra one from one of their trade backs. And overall, I know this. After talking about these other 3 classes, this one not one of our favorites. The Donovan Jackson pick at 24. They take one of the better guards in a class where guards were flying off the board, I think earlier than we suspected at 12 and 18. With Gray Zabel and Booker going as high as they did, and then Donovan Jackson right behind them. So, what were your immediate thoughts to that pick for the Vikings?
Yeah, I mean, again, it wasn't one of my favorites. I felt like they were a prime trade back candidate because they had so few draft picks. And I'm assuming they probably did try to trade back. I mean, the report was the Eagles were pretty much calling every single team trying to trade up for Jahad Campbell. So I'm sure they were one of the teams that they were trying to trade up with and just couldn't get a deal done. But I'm not going to be a hypocrite because listen, I've already said that a lot of these guards and even tackles were drafted over their consensus ranking because just the teams value it so much. So I get it. I get taking a guard in that pick, and they've needed to attack interior offensive line for a long time. They did it in the offseason as well by basically poaching 2 starting offensive linemen from the Colts, and Will Fries and Ryan Kelly. But so they've attacked that interior offensive line, man. So I get that. But I think overall, dude, we're just not going to like the draft as much because they just didn't have as many picks. I mean, they didn't own their 2nd round pick. They had 1 3rd round pick. So they just didn't have the picks. You have to kind of, again, as we talked about in the AFC North review, you kind of have to take into account the trades they made to get in this position, and kind of count that into the draft. So that's part of it. But yeah, I mean, when a team picks 5 times, you're just, I mean, it's not as many players, so not as many guys as we like.
Yeah, I think, you know, we've talked about not being a big fan of when teams draft for need. And in this one, it was an interesting situation because, to your point, they had already signed the former Colts in basically interior line. So they had filled 2 of those spots, and maybe they weren't feeling great about that. But to me, it felt interesting to then kind of force a guard pick in the 1st round when you've already kind of rebuilt the interior bit. Clearly, their vision was to overhaul it entirely. But for the value there, with not having a ton of picks, I would have loved to have seen them trade down. And maybe we'll find out more, or we won't, in terms of whether there was a deal on the board they could have done or not. If it turns out they turned down some offer from the Eagles, it's going to feel a little rough to have not gone. Especially seeing what they also could have potentially traded back with um, the Giants, and or when the Giants traded up, and then when the Falcons traded up. So those were both two teams that trade up right after them. So I find it hard to believe they wouldn't have been on the phone here as well. And if you were able to get the extra first, like the Falcons trading with the Rams did, or even I think it was a couple of thirds that the Giants sent the Texans. I mean, that would have made me feel a lot better about this. You would have had more at bats. And that's not to take away from what Donovan Jackson is and what he can be immediately. It's just more of the process of how you draft. And not the biggest fan from Quasi and Co. of taking that reach in the first, in my opinion, in terms of what you could have had. But he is an interesting prospect. So he's going to start at guard immediately, but he did have opportunity at tackle when Josh Simmons was out, who also goes at the end of the first. And played tackle. So he does have a versatile skill set. So he could be a potential backup for the other positions if one of those guys goes down, but play for you at guard immediately. So all things considered, they do get a starting guard out of it.
Yeah, and it does make him interesting that he is versatile, but it does kind of feel bad that the Lions potentially got as good of a player at the same position and at the end of the second round. Like, I mean, and listen, people had Donovan Jackson ranked higher, but still, that just kind of feels a little bad, especially again when you only pick 5 times. So I mean, yeah, just by the nature of that, the Vikings aren't going to have his draft that we like as much. But again, I get it, man. I mean, look at other teams around the NFL. They're doing the same thing. They were overdrafting guards. At some point, you can't say they're overdrafting them when everyone's doing it. Like if everyone's valuing these interior linemen that highly, then you can't say it's an overdraft at that point. And also, again, I'll speak to the depth of the interior offensive line class was just really, really weak. I mean, at the end of the day, there were probably only 4 or 5 guys that had a potential to start right away from his class. So grabbing one of those guys in the first, I understand that.
Yeah. Yep. And then with their next pick, which was their third rounder since they didn't have a second, they go Ty Felton, receiver out of Maryland. And we've already seen a handful of Maryland guys go. Apparently Maryland was loaded this year. But pretty athletic receiver. Ran a 4.37, had a 1.51 10 yards, so pretty explosive, fast receiver out of Maryland that they pick up. And I think he posed career highs this past season as well. So it's always a decent feeling when you get a guy coming off of his best season, because I think a lot of this draft class across the board was a lot of guys who didn't break out until like year 5 and year 6, which is always interesting to see. But getting a guy who is at least coming out as his best season so far, I think he has the opportunity to kind of immediately be a rotational guy for them. Get some opportunities at receiver there alongside Justin Jefferson and Jordan Addison.
Yeah, that's part of it. You're going to one of the most loaded wide receiver cores in the NFL, so that's a good receiving core to just be a part of and develop. And he is a bit of a freak, man. 4.38. I mean, again, in the third round, I like taking a chance on a guy like that. It just feels worse because that's like your second pick, and it's not really starting a filling position. But which I get, it's in the third round. You don't really expect to do that. But it is also interesting because you talked about them drafting for need, and their second pick is a receiver, so they kind of feel like they needed a little bit more depth there, which I kind of find a little bit interesting.
Yeah, definitely. And again, they would have been curious to see them take. I still think edge is something they could. I know they took Dallas Turner last year, but I still think edge is something they could have used, adding some more depth and opportunity at since losing Daniil Hunter. They do go Georgia D tackle, Tyrion Ingram Dawkins in the 5th to add some additional depth to the D line.
Again, just taking those Georgia guys.
Again, and it's funny, like that's probably like the 3rd defensive tackle from Georgia we've already mentioned. So they had so many guys there rotating through. So adding some depth there. And then Kobe King, linebacker from Penn State in the 6th, continuing to add some defensive depth. And then Um, Gavin Bartholomew, tight end from Pitt, in the 6th as well. Kobe King's an interesting one as well. Not a ton of not a ton of production necessarily, um, but had some decent run stopping ability. He may be more of an early down guy. Get him out there if he gets some playing time. Put him in there on some run situations. Bartholomew had not a ton of production this past season with Pitt. Um, but he was decent at getting yards after the catch, so that may have been what kind of stood out to them with him.
They also, we got to mention, they also traded for Sam Howell during the
Right.
draft. Like during the draft, and they needed a backup quarterback in a bad way, especially since we don't know what JJ McCarthy is yet, Dakota. I mean, we really don't. He was hurt all last year. Sam Darnold had his breakout year. They decided to move on from Sam Darnold, and they want JJ to take over the reins. So you kind of needed an experienced starter to be the backup, and they did that during the draft. And I like him as a backup option. I mean, he's not a good starting option, but as a backup, I do like getting Howell in the room. So, but really, this Vikings draft is going to be dependent on if JJ McCarthy's good or not, right? Like we'll say, okay, we like this draft if they're because again, they're kind of building around the rookie quarterback. They felt like, okay, we have to
Yep.
completely revamp this interior of this offensive line, and that's we're really only going to see the fruits of that labor if the quarterback can play. And so that's going to be kind of what matters going into 2025 for the Vikings.
And you're completely right. We've already talked about it. This is only 8th one we've done, and
Yeah.
there a lot of teams building around young quarterbacks. The first 2 picks, guard to protect your quarterback, and then wide receiver to add more depth and playmakers for him. So it is nice seeing teams do that because, as you've experienced firsthand, it's not great when teams neglect that for
Yeah.
your young star quarterback. So
No doubt.
you love seeing that. Yeah, all of this is contingent on what JJ is, and it is fascinating. I'm excited to see it because obviously, I mean, Kevin O'Connell. We got to talk about at least he definitely seems to just be a quarterback whisperer. I mean, he is absolutely. It's an uncanny ability to just get the most out of his quarterback. Sam Darnold has the best season by far of his career there in his 1 year. Kirk looked fantastic while there. So all of that to say, it's regardless of what you think of JJ, it's hard not to think that Kevin O'Connell's not going to make him look good pretty early on. So excited to see the Vikings offense this season with the rebuilt offensive line that they clearly felt was in need after you know Sam Darnold got kind of crushed against the Rams there in the playoff game. So yeah, with that in mind, let's look at their
They had a loaded
UDFA.
UDFA class, man. They
Yeah,
brought in like a ton of guys. That brought in Max Broserman or
yeah,
Brosemer
Roseman from
from Minnesota. A local guy getting them in the room. Also, I mean, they just brought in a ton of depth at UDFAs, which I always find interesting when teams do that. I don't think it really speaks to your roster, though. I mean, the Ravens did the same thing. I think they just want to get a look at guys. But in all fairness to this team, they especially offensively, dude, they don't have a lot of holes now, and that kind of makes me like
True.
the Donovan Jackson pick a little better. I mean, you kind of
Yeah.
fill that last hole on the offense. And last thing I'll say about their draft class before we get into favorite pick, though, kind of surprised they didn't take a running back in this loaded running back class, even when you only have 5 picks. Aaron Jones isn't going to be around forever. Obviously, he's already getting quite a bit older, and they signed Jordan Mason, but I don't think Jordan Mason's like the future of of that running back room. So I kind of would have liked to see them take a running back in just this very uniquely loaded running back class.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think they actually traded for Jordan Mason, if I remember
Oh, did
correctly.
they? Okay.
Yeah, I think they actually traded for him. So,
Oh yeah,
and I
I
don't
think you're
remember.
right.
Yeah, and I'm trying to remember when it was, but um, yeah, I don't remember. It must have been pre-draft, but yeah, I am surprised they didn't take one. They re-signed Aaron Jones, but would have liked to have seen them take a young developmental running back in this class with how deep it was to kind of pair behind him. But with the minimal picks, also hard to fault them too much. Um, but yeah, I mean, Vikings look pretty interesting going in the next season now. Excited to watch them and see what JJ is. So, with their minimal picks, what would you say was your favorite?
Uh, I guess I'll go. I mean, I guess I'll go with the first round pick. It's kind of lame to say. Yeah, I'll just say Donovan Jackson. I mean, listen, I will say this. They did turn a weakness in their team, the interior offensive line, into now I think is a strength. I mean, you bring in Will Fries, Ryan Kelly, and Donovan Jackson. That's going to completely revamp the interior of that offensive line. And so I think that there is something to say about that. So yeah, I'll go Donovan Jackson. That's my favorite pick.
I guess I'll go Ty Felton.
Okay.
I'll go Felton. Just because the athleticism, getting another guy in there. You can never have too many weapons for your young quarterback. I think you and I will both. I love Jordan Addison. Obviously, Jay Jett is the best receiver in football. But I also love Jordan Addison. That 1-2 punch is by far one of the best in the NFL. But adding another guy like that can maybe play in the slot a little bit, stretch the field some more, like adding that for a piece for your new young quarterback who's yet to start his NFL career. So
Yeah.
exciting
We'll
stuff for
see.
the Vikings. Yeah. So that wraps up the Vikings 2025 class. And now to kind of encompass all of them, we're going to use Renee Bugner, I think is how you pronounce his name. So he does essentially like a kind of how we refer to this consensus big board where it's all the data across everybody's rankings. He kind of does a similar thing from a draft grade perspective. So Austin referenced it in the AFC North review. So we'll do that for each of these videos, kind of touch on that. So how did these 4 drafts look?
Kind of the lower end, I would say, from a division perspective. Although, again, I think it just speaks to a lot of teams had really good drafts, and you have to rank them somewhere. But we'll start with the good. So the Bears had the highest ranked draft class according to their GPA and the Renee's rankings he's put together. They're ranked 18th in the NFL. Or excuse me, they're tied for 19th. And then you also have the Packers coming in at 25, which right off the bat, those are 2 drafts I kind of like. So I'm like, okay, that's kind of low. But then I look at the teams ahead of them. I'm like, well, I kind of get it. Like, I mean, it's just a lot of good drafts. And then the Vikings are at 29. And then the Lions are tied at 30th. I will say, I think the Lions ranking's a little bit harsh. Like, and maybe some of these, I would say some of these grades probably are taking into account how did this team get to the amount of picks they're at, and I kind of respect that. So if that's what they're taking into account with the Vikings draft, I get it. But just on the surface of the players you're adding, I would definitely take the Lions draft over the Vikings draft, just personally. But yeah, man, I think these teams all had solid drafts. Like whether they're low in these rankings or not, I think their drafts are solid, and all these teams probably got better.
Yeah, that's interesting, and I think it kind of still encompasses what we've touched on throughout this process, which is it just seems like teams have gotten better at drafting, in terms of just how they work their board, taking what falls to them, not reaching too often on positions where you put yourself in the need for it. So, and I think the Isaac Tesla pick is probably driving theirs down, combined with Tyler, because they gave up 2/3 to get him. I think he was 168 on the consensus. So that pick is probably what is driving theirs down, but I wouldn't read. It's still worth noting, but overall, I think the NFL just did a much better job this year of drafting, where there's far less classes where we're just not a fan of it, and typically it's just because they didn't have a lot of picks. The Vikings just didn't have a ton of capital, but yeah. So that wraps up the NFC North draft review. We will be working on the AFC and NFC East next, so keep a lookout for those 2 divisions if you're a fan of one of those teams. But yeah, we'll get those out over the next couple weeks, working our way around to the South and then the West for both the AFC and NFC. So until next time.
Thanks for talking ball with us.